All right, I'm going to go back to the past because I'm an historian, but I have to tell you that since we're at practically the last session of this wonderful two-day conference, yesterday I thought I should go see the other side. So I went to a very important roundtable of doctors talking about the future and medicine in a custom-tailored nature. I wanted to understand what I was really going to not talk about as a mothball-filled historian. And I was amazed, because really what they were talking about for all of their future was the past. And the past is all we have. The present is too fleeting, and the future is out there, but we don't know it. So we have to realize that for climate change, for cancer research, the only thing that makes them go forward is a better knowledge of the past, the human one, the statistical one, the weather past, the famous carrots on the North Pole, glaciers. And if that's the case, then maybe we historians also have some small role to play for the future, although we deny this most of the time. Now, past and historians, what do historians do? Well, they try to show the evolutions, the turning points, the differences, make the comparisons, so which ones are correct, which ones are false. But let's be frank. The past is constantly evolving for the simple reason that we ask of it the questions that are pertinent for our present. Otherwise, no one really talks about a dead, buried past. It can be archaeology, but even archaeology is greatly relevant today in scientific terms. Let me give you two examples of how the past can evolve. The first concerns America. About 10 years ago, I was running around the Harvard bookstore, and all of a sudden I realized something that was absolutely not the case when I was an undergraduate there, that the section of Rome had become exorbitantly large. Isn't that an interesting way of understanding why the Americans want to know about Rome, the rise and fall thereof, decline, and the end of a republic and perhaps an empire? No comments on last day's newspapers. The second example is even fresher. It comes from the European Union. Now, the European Union was sold after World War II as the greatest brand new experiment of humanity. Countries reconciling with each other, abhorring war, coming together, and then, in a sense, the apogee of it all, creating a common European currency. I will, of course, not mention my neighbor to the right in the UK on that front. But this was supposed to be brand new in history. Not more than about a week ago, there was an op-ed in the New York Times saying, we've got it all wrong. The European Union today is really the equivalent of the Germanic principalities and the declining Holy Roman Empire. It can't get its act together on anything. Sovereignty, economics, ideas, values, horizons. So all of a sudden, from being the world's most brand new experiment, it's become one of those parts of history that were really dim, and not only because of the 30 Years' War, but simply because it was so complex to handle, and it ended in failure. And one can only hope, and here's the historian speaking, worry not, there may not be a Kaiser Wilhelm that will then lead to the chaos of the 20th century, and therefore Europe might become a reconsolidated thing under a horrendous program. I don't think we have enough of a common vision to even impose one on anyone else. So this is the past that's constantly evolving. So then there's another element historians have to do. They have to show the false uses of the past and how they can be used to stoke fears in the present. That the same causes might lead to the same results. And I go back now to my medical roundtable, of which I know nothing, but I can give you one example, is that the biologists and the specialists of the genome have explained to what an extent identical twins who have the identical genetic set are not identical at all, even identical twins beyond the fingerprints, that one can develop a cancer and another one might not, or might develop a much milder form of the cancer. So if it's good for the real science of the future, let me tell you, it's unbelievably good for the history of the past. Because as we now talk about 2008 and the comparisons with the Great Depression, it may have the same effects. It may also bring out right-wing factors, xenophobia, even anti-Semitism. It may bring out all sorts of horrors that we associate with the blackest pages of Europe, but in such a milder form, in such a less dangerous form, that one must be very careful about those who want to play with the devil and talk about the same causes producing the same effects. then the past is revealing major changes. It's happened before. That's what historians sometimes say. Well, it really has. I mean, when people say, look, after the Second World War, modern industrial societies, they're secular, men and women will be equal, and so forth, and then we have a backlash. History is full of backlashes, and we may have religious extremism. The condition of women is perhaps not improving that much. Certainly reading newspapers about India nowadays can cast a moderate understanding of where we're heading. And barbarism follows civilization and not the other way around. Calm and war follow peace and not just the other way around. And it's hard to imagine for most of us here coming from abroad, but Damascus is 229 kilometers away. It's the distance I take to go to my country house when I go from Paris to Caen. Now, that was one hell of a bloody period back in France in the early 12th century. However, we are in a situation in which there's no point to speak about a tomorrow in grandiose terms without also thinking of a today. Now, what can the past reveal? And I will not use the term lessons. This is my small little understanding of what the past can do. Instill massive modesty, even on the term of newness, both against the optimists and against the pessimists. Teach the understanding and motivations of the other side. I'm convinced that you cannot have history. It's like a tango. It takes two to tango. You can't have history by yourselves. It's like the sound of one hand clapping. It takes into account the very long term and above all, the perverse effects of decisions made in the short term with respect to the long term. And this is something that politicians, as Joe Joffe said, never do learn. Factor in collective emotions and fears. They do give a lot of steam and fuel for history. Never forget the role of economics, for sure, in the rise and fall of nations, but also limit the supremacy of economists. And then never forget the longevity of what were the most boring chapters of any historical training, institutions and bureaucracies. It's amazing how those two concepts survive. They're like the cockroaches of the world. They will survive a nuclear attack. Now, the paradox of the past is that seen from the present, let me turn it around. If you're sitting in the present and you look to the future, it's full of different possibilities, right? But when that future becomes the past, then people start saying, well, it was inexorable, it was inevitable, it could only happen. So historians are caught in the middle of this strip and trying to untangle the contradictions of both ends of this proposition. Now, just to finish on this element, a few words about how do I understand as a historian the issues with respect to where we are today, sitting here in Israel. First of all, one should make a major distinction between two entirely different concepts, history and memory. History is not memory. Memory is an entirely different emotional, subjective concept. When people come together and share memories and discuss the effect of their memories, then you can start perhaps thinking of a history. Can one use as an Israeli the European Jewish past for Israel's future? Heavens forbid. The victim is not an actor. Israel is an actor. And the major ambiguity therein is something that conditions not only the Jewish Israeli future and present, but that of many people around the world, including Jews who do not live in Israel. Then a final element, and I shall be really provocative here. Can a country without a state tradition for 2,000 years catch up? Can it get that depth of field from somewhere? Future in technology, in science, and startups may not give it. And one of the questions that lies ahead, as far as I'm concerned with respect to Israel, is whether this 2,000-year hiatus can be filled in. And I do not know what Max Weber will be saying on this count.